This video is all about today's housing market versus 2008. If you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. My name is Chris Igoe, and if you're a returning viewer, I appreciate your participation in our journey. Now, today I received an email from a data service provider that sourced the information from NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors, and the infographic that they shared is something that I've heard a lot of people in the industry talking about, which is that today is nothing like it was 15 years ago. And 15 years ago, if you do the math, is 2008. So I'll pop in the infographic that was shared with me, and I'm going to do a little bit of analysis as to how it is different today versus 15 years ago. And so we'll be able to compare and contrast. And I know it's a narrative that a lot of people are sharing, but it's important to understand what's actually happening because a lot of the data that's being sourced in this infographic is not accurate, or it's incomplete at best. Or perhaps it's too narrow of a window to really be helpful. And speaking of being helpful, I am currently headed to go pick up my daughter from school because, unfortunately, the school nurse just called and said that she is sick, which stands to reason because my youngest is also sick, which also means that I will likely be sick soon, which is why I'm doing this video to go pick her up, because typically, in my experience, there's about a 48 to 72 hour window between them getting sick and me getting sick. And, well, long story short, ain't nobody got time for being sick. And right now, the information that I just read is making me sick. So I'll hopefully not make you sick too, but we'll go through it right now. So today is nothing like 15 years ago. Comparing key variables in the last housing cycle versus today. The key variables that they discuss, last housing cycle versus the current housing cycle. Job cuts, net of gains and losses. In the last housing cycle, there were 8 million job cuts. And in the current housing cycle, there are none. So when I hear that there are no job cuts in this current housing cycle, the only thing I can say is, I don't know what that means. That's not true. There have been tons of job cuts that have happened across the economy, and this is just not true. Now I'm going to put on my sunglasses because it is super bright out. It's 58 degrees out right now, which in Florida is Arctic, but it's actually supposed to get much colder over the course of the next few days. And I'm told that this weekend it should be in the 30s, which I think is incredible, but it's unusual. So let's keep going. Key variable number 2. Total jobs as per the household survey. Now, the thing I like about the household survey is that it doesn't allow for multiple jobs held by the same employee to be counted multiple times. So it is a more accurate number, but it's still not 100% accurate. Nonetheless, in the last housing cycle, there were 138 million total jobs as per the household survey. And today there's 158 million, which loosely translated according to this means that people are employed. People have jobs. And that's great. You definitely need a job in order to pay for your mortgage. But what I don't see in this infographic and what is not accounted for right now, and what I don't hear a lot of people talking about as it relates to the housing market being different this time, maybe the housing market is different and maybe these things are all true, but the consumer is in much worse shape today than at any other point in history, or at least relative to the not so distant past. The consumer is hurting badly, and wage growth has absolutely not kept up with inflation. Now, I'll go a little bit deeper on this as we move forward. But the fact that people have jobs right now is obviously a good thing. But if they aren't earning enough to make ends meet, chances are at some point they're going to have to make a different decision. They're going to have to decide whether they're going to put food on the table or whether they're going to pay their mortgage payment. Or separate to that, they're going to have to decide if they want to live off credit and or equity in their home, which to me are very similar. And that's what we are seeing right now in today's housing market, which doesn't come up as a line item. Many consumers right now are maxed out on credit cards. Many consumers right now are barely making their minimum payments on their credit cards. Many consumers right now are tapping into their home equity and using it as if it's a piggy bank. Many affluent homeowners right now, and I just saw this talked about on Patrick Bet-David's Valuetainment, or maybe it was his podcast, but nonetheless, there was an article out recently talking about the luxury watch market and how there is a massive supply of Rolex and other luxury watches that are flooding the market and driving prices downward, which is great if you've got money and you're looking to score a great deal on a watch. But I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know that if people are starting to get rid of their quote unquote luxuries, if they're looking to find ways to get liquid, it's only a matter of time until they've sold all of their designer bags, their designer watches, their luxury products, their baseball cards, their art, their cars, their boats, NFTs, their crypto, their whatever. When they've gotten rid of all those things, the last thing they're going to get rid of is the thing that has the most equity, which is likely going to be their house. But they may rob Peter to pay Paul to keep the musical chairs game rolling. They may continue to do whatever it takes to stay in their house. But at some point in the future, the music stops and they have to face the reality of where they're at. And when that happens, there is going to be a lot of homes that hit the market roughly at the same time. And when that happens, it will drive the prices of homes and the value of homes downward. It's just the way it goes, which is why I always advise every buyer, and your timeline of being in the property that you're buying is 2 to 5 years, or maybe even 7 years, then you may want to pay a lot of attention to what your finances are, because chances are in that window of time, real estate values are going lower. And you may have to sell that house at a loss. And long term, I suspect you're going to be fine. 10, 15, 20 years from now, that storm will be over and we will be appreciating once again. But it would not be prudent or responsible of me to advise anybody to buy a house if your window of time of living in that house is short term, or you're prepared to take a loss. But I digress. I got off track here. Let's get back to business. So the next key variable in this analysis of why today is nothing like 15 years ago is the subprime loan market. I find this to be a very interesting reference point, and I'll get into that in a second here. But in the last housing cycle, it was prevalent. And in the current housing cycle, subprime loans are virtually none. Now, I'm going to take umbrage with that and disagree with that, because right now I am seeing all types of different financial products and all types of real estate professionals out there advising their clients to go after and consider lending products that are not necessarily subprime loans, but they are akin to an adjustable rate mortgage, which are these 321 or 21 or whatever the newest product is, but they reset to the market rate of whenever you got locked in at some point in the next few years. And I've heard the expression that you buy the house and you date the rate. And I hate when people say that, because if you cannot afford the rate that you are getting locked into at some point in the future, you should not buy the house because you can't afford it. And the idea that you'll be able to easily refinance at a much lower rate at some point in the near future, I think is unlikely. And if you've gone negative equity in the home, then there's no possibility of you being able to do that. And the odds of that happening in the near term are much higher than they are the other way around. But full disclosure, if homes appreciate wildly and interest rates go down, well, then you can do those things. But I'd rather prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Which brings me to the next differentiating factor between last housing cycle and today's, which is new construction over the course of the past 5 years. Well, in the last housing cycle, there were 7.65 million new construction homes that were built. And in this housing cycle, there's 4.6 million, which I assume means that there are less new homes available for a bigger population. But the truth is, depending on what market you're in, you can see that new construction homes and home builders are taking a beating, especially in this increasing interest rate market. So although that hasn't really happened in my market, there are plenty of markets where you can aggressively negotiate all kinds of different things with the builder, because they must get out of these homes as quickly as possible. They got to get them off their balance sheets, which is a long way of saying I don't think that stat means much relative to this comparison. Now, the next stat is inventory on the market, which in the last housing cycle was 3.8 to 4 million homes for sale. And in this current housing market, it's 1 to 1.2 million. There's low inventory. And that's true. That's because sellers aren't selling their home because there's no incentive for them to do so. They're not in financial pain yet. But make no mistake, that day is coming. Next up is mortgage delinquencies, which in the last housing cycle was 10.1%. And in this housing cycle, it's 3.6%. Well, what I don't know about this infographic is what they are referencing when they talk about the current housing cycle. Because maybe these numbers are true as of today, but I can promise you they're not going to be the same a year from now. In my stock brokerage career, there was a disclaimer that was put on almost anything that ever went out, which is that past performance does not indicate what future performance will be. And if we're looking at what the last few years of our housing market was like and trying to anticipate what the future will look like, well, then I got news for you. You're completely out of your mind because that's not what's going to happen. This next cycle that we're going into is going to be incredibly different than anything that we've experienced in a very long time. And the fact that mortgage delinquency is low right now is to me a meaningless stat, but I digress. And I don't want this to be a 40-minute video. I need to get this done before I pick up my sick daughter. So the next infographic or the next stat that they use to make this infographic is the number of homes in foreclosure, which in the last housing cycle was up to 4.6%. And in today's, it's 0.6%. Well, that might be true today, but it's definitely not going to be true in the future. I just talked to a friend of mine yesterday who happens to be a financial advisor, and he told me that his market forecast for the stock market was the worst bear market that we've ever experienced since 1920. And then he went on to say that bulls make money, bears make money, and pigs get slaughtered. Now, I know that it's totally possible to make a fortune in a bear market. It's totally possible to make a fortune in a recession. And that was totally true of my stockbroker career. I never made more money than when we were in economic crisis. And the reason I made money is because my clients made money. But cash seeks its highest value. And there's a ton of money that is always sitting on the sidelines somewhere that is looking to seek its highest value. And when there is blood in the streets, as far as the market's concerned, there are going to be greedy and opportunistic buyers who are going to gobble up those distressed assets with two hands. But Wall Street has been greedy. And you've got Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Citigroup and Bank of America and all these other big institutions that have gone out there and monetized the debt of mortgages. And I'm talking about pooling different debt instruments or creating new debt instruments or financial products to seek higher yield by slicing and dicing these different pools of mortgages and creating securities that they can trade and make a profit on. And believe me, these institutions are doing that, and they've been doing it since the bailouts. In fact, these institutions probably got more opportunistic when they realized that they were bailed out and they were playing with house money. They took on even more risk. And so when these different mortgages do reset and when home values do depreciate and the consumer is left holding the bag because they lost their job or they must sell at a loss, Wall Street will implode. And we'll be looking at markets very similar, if not worse, to what we looked at in 2008. So on paper, do I think that today's housing market is stronger than 2008's? Sure. But the consumer, which is the key to all of this, is in much worse shape. Consumer and the consumer's economic activity is the linchpin to all of this. And if the consumer is no bueno, then no market is immune to a massive crash. And we are in the first inning of that economic cycle. We haven't even begun to feel the pain of recession yet, which does not mean that you should not buy a house if you can afford one and have a long-term timeline. Now, I share all that not to scare you. I share it to prepare you. And if you are prudent and responsible and understand what it is you want and where it is you're going, and what your timelines are, then I would tell you, negotiate the best possible deal you can now and max out South Florida living to the fullest. But if there's any hesitancy and you're not 100% convinced of what you're doing, there's any type of financial doubt as to whether it's the right decision, then pump the brakes and wait until you're 100% certain. Now, I hope you found this content valuable. And if you did, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. And check out my next video because I suspect you will love it a lot. And until next time, peace.